forming government, does some of the best investigative work on schools in the state, and he's out with a new report on what happened to $1.5 billion in COVID special aid. And, well, I'm not going to spoil it. Quinton, thanks so very much for taking some time. Thanks for joining us here on the Ben Young Show.
Super amped up from the AC/DC. Let's do this.
Well, I'm glad you are. I'm glad you're ready to rock and roll. All right. We know that Wisconsin got a lot of COVID money. This is the ESSER money for anybody in schools who's trying to be specific. The assumption is because of DPI's track record, because of the track record, particularly at MPS, that this money was wasted. You looked at almost every single dollar. What have you found? And where was this money spent? Because it's been spent, but where did it go?
So I'm eyeing the Powerball jackpot right now. We're at about $930 million. So I was thinking about how so many lottery winners and celebrities end up broke just a few years after they get rich. So they take in all this money at once. They spend it as if they're always going to have these peak earnings, and then the bill for their fourth house comes due, and the Viper comes due, and they declare bankruptcy. That's really what happened with the ESSER money in Wisconsin schools. So, as you said, $1.5 billion over 2 years went to schools. If you search IRG ESSER online, you'll see a database where you can look at every single dollar that was allocated and budgeted for that time. This is the big takeaway. America and Wisconsin have more people, more staff working in public schools now than at any time in American history. Wisconsin lost 47,000 students, but added over 2,000 staff. That means that Wisconsin schools lost about $850 million in revenue, but added $100 million in expenses. That's like $1 billion gap. And when private businesses do that, they go bankrupt. But what happens in Wisconsin is they go to referendum. And so unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that districts hired permanent staff on temporary money, and now they're coming hat in hand to taxpayers, and that's not what we want to see.
I want to get to the tax increases, the referendum questions that came because you do draw an A to B to C for a couple of different districts, but this was temporary money. $1.5 billion in one-time cash, and 40% of it went to salaries, which means you got to pay that extra next year and the year after and the year after. Let me ask the easy question here. How is this money supposed to be spent? When it was sold as COVID aid. Were there any real guidelines? Did a school district spend this smartly? Is there any indication that this was ever intended to do anything other than just prop up public schools?
There was like some paperwork that people needed to fill out, but truly, as much as the federal government will ever do, this was no strings attached. Truly, there were a couple of guidelines, but beyond that, open season. So this is kind of like the experiment. This is what scientists do. They're like, you didn't have this money before, you got all this money to do whatever you wanted with it, and what are the results? For those who don't know, Harvard tracked how students recovered. We are 30th in reading recovery, despite all that money. Things that might have been great. Temporary tutors. My mom's old. She's a retired teacher. Hire her for a couple of years. Have her come in, help students. Oh, hey, we kind of have an old building in rural or urban Wisconsin. We don't have AC. And, in May and June, it gets pretty hot and the kids can't learn. Great. One-time funding. Or, hey, we need to buy some really great textbooks for math that are going to drive achievement. One-time spending. That's what it should have been on. And instead, as you said, 40% to permanent salaries, that's hundreds of millions of dollars that they needed to come up with the next year to be able to afford those same people.
And when you don't have kids, because we pay in Wisconsin and in most states, we pay for public schools by butts in seats. And if there are fewer butts in seats, that's fewer state money or fewer state dollars. That leads to a whole down the line dominoes fall. We're talking with Quinton Klabon. He's with the Institute for Reforming Government. IRG has a great database. You can actually go and look and see how your kid's school spent the money, the $1.5 billion that all schools in Wisconsin government got during COVID for COVID aid. You can see how they spent it, how well they spent it, how poorly they spent it. You can find all that stuff online. Just look for IRG, and it's ESSER, ESSER. I like this line because, again, even the summary on this thing's like 50 pages. It is a deep dive. But I really like this line from the report. It said, ESSER likely propped up $614 million over 2 years in operating costs. Is that the most important takeaway? And why is it so important to highlight that this was money that didn't go for textbooks? It didn't even go for face masks and, the hand sanitizing gel. This went to cover a gap that schools were looking at before COVID and will continue to look at after COVID.
That's absolutely the most important thing. This is the way to think of it for you business owners or even business patrons out there. If you lost 10% of your customers, but you added 5% more in employees, your budget's just never going to work out. Either you really, cap the pay of the employees that you're doing, you lay off the employees, or you got to find that more revenue. And so if you have an ongoing operating cost, that is a teacher, maybe let's say it's a 50-year-old teacher, that teacher is going to be there during the pandemic, they're going to be there after the pandemic, they're going to be there in 2030, but you don't have the money to pay for them anymore. And you can say, hey, we're going to let teachers retire. We don't want to be the bad guy. We're going to, hey, if they move out of the town or they retire, that's how we want to do it. We want to be gentle with this. But unfortunately, we're just losing 10,000 students in Wisconsin a year. The disenrollment is just happening so quickly that unfortunately districts are going to have to make tough decisions. Now, I want to shout out a good story. I'll give you a couple of bad ones in a little bit. But Oshkosh made the tough decision. They're proposing laying off some teachers, unfortunately, because they just don't have the kids. They don't have the kids that to require the need for those teachers. They're able to make the tough decisions. Meanwhile, you have Wauwatosa in the Milwaukee area. They lost 650 students, added 100 employees. They're saying, the superintendent is saying in the board meeting to the public, we've chosen the most expensive model of education. When people talk about referendums, we may need more. And so that's how it affects people who are listening to this. It's cool to dig through the data. It's cool to see how your schools made decisions on what the money was going to. But what it really means is, how is it going to affect your pocketbook when it comes to referenda in 2026, in 2028, in 2030? Because unless you make the tough decisions, these problems are still going to exist because those employees are still going to be there.
And if they couldn't make the tough decisions when they had $1.5 billion in extra money, what makes anybody think they're going to make the tough decisions now when they don't have that extra money? We're talking with Quinton Klabon. He's with the Institute for Reforming Government. I follow him on Twitter, on X. You should as well. If you want to understand, at the granular level in some cases, just how broken the way that we manage our public schools are, you should absolutely pick him up. And some great stuff on test scores and readiness. And that's where I will get you out on the question of why this is what it is. Because we spent $1.5 billion over just 2 years. And we've heard for years from public schools here in Wisconsin and across the country that they are poor. They don't have any money. If only we had more money, we could do a better job of teaching kids. Well, the numbers are in. They got the money, and the scores haven't improved. Where did this money go, and why didn't it help the kids?
I think there is a natural reaction. I think a lot of schools are either forced to or decide they themselves need to do more than reading and mathematics and civics and science. And that's where you run into trouble. Not saying that kids don't have mental issues from, being locked in their houses for a year. Not saying that kids aren't coming in with special needs, or that some rural areas really do have to figure out oh gosh, how do we maintain a school when we have so few students? Not saying there aren't tough decisions, but when you throw just people at the problem, like a mental health counselor and a college counselor and a paraprofessional, a teaching assistant in the room and a second teaching assistant in the room and a pull-out class and, all these bells and whistles, and you distract from the core mission of schools, one, you run out of money really quickly. And two, you just end up not doing a good job of your core mission. Again, 30th in reading recovery, 16th in math recovery. We still have not caught up to where we were before the pandemic. The test scores show that. And so it's incredibly frustrating when we are adding and adding and adding staff, but not seeing the results for it. It just comes to a point where we're driving off the cliff, and tough decisions need to be made.
And that's a very important point. Staff. A lot of times we think teachers, and more teachers is good, right? We want smaller class sizes. One teacher for fewer kids, that's how they learn. But this was not just teachers. There were a lot of people who will never see a kid in a classroom who got hired during COVID. And like you said, once you hire them, you either got to fire them or pay them forever, and the bill is going to come due. They blew through $1.5 billion, and they're not even done. We could spend an hour on this, but we unfortunately, Quinton, we got to go. Check it out online. Find it over at the Institute for Reforming Government. Look for ESSER, ESSER. Quinton Klabon, thank you so very much for taking the time. Thanks for this. Great work. Phenomenal work on this.
Adore the show, adore the audience. Appreciate all you do.
Appreciate it. Again, follow him on Twitter. He's great. It's a good fourth, 25%, 40%, I don't know, of what it is that comes directly from his account on X. You will be a step ahead of even your local school board if you go and you follow his stuff on schools. When we come back, President Trump's making Christmas better, and I'm not even talking about Barbie dolls.